we had a sketch group in year 6. So that's when I was 10 years old. There was like a sketch group that went year to year, and we would put on a comedy sketch show every Friday. And
nice.
I loved doing that.
That's the last year of
And I
primary
loved,
school for us old people, year 6. Last year of primary school.
Just before
you were
intermediate.
You were doing sketch comedy every week. It's hilarious.
Yeah, we were doing sketch comedy. And I used to be the one who was like, we're not practicing enough. We need to write more sketches. And everybody else was like, I don't know, man, we're kids. And I was like, no.
I can write a better joke. I can write a better joke if you can.
And we were doing like parodies of game shows and stuff. And it was really, really, and I remember loving that and definitely being like, and my teacher would leave sometimes, like if she had to go do something, she'd be like, Robbie's going to tell a story. And so then I would just sit in front of the class and tell a story. And the fact that like the other kids in the class were okay with that, and weren't just like, why the hell would we let this kid in our class just sit in front of us and tell us a story for 5 minutes?
Hey, kia ora team. Today's episode is brought to you by Mr. Vintage. Mr. Vintage is New Zealand's most iconic t-shirt brand. Doesn't matter if it's a local pop cultural phenomenon, a sporting event, or even a New Zealand personality, there's every chance that Mr. Vintage has made a t-shirt for them and some product for it. Kiwi owned since 2004, selling Kiwiana t-shirts and gifts online. There's even a range of king sizes for us bigger fellas. Today, Mr. Vintage and us want to give you an extra special. How about 20% off any men's t-shirt? All you need to do is go to mrvintage.co.nz. In the checkout, use the promo code FUNNY, FUNNY, and you will get 20% off any men's t-shirt. Head to mrvintage.co.nz, enter the promo code FUNNY at checkout for 20% off any men's t-shirt. How are you, man?
I'm pretty good. Yeah. Congrats on the new podcast. How's it going so far?
It's going all right. I mean, it could always be bigger. You could always have better reach. That's the world we live in. But
that's the nature of it.
The back catalogue looks pretty good. Just pulling favors in from people we know, and we continue on. It's basically, I mean, you and me have done my other podcast, the DOC.
Yeah.
Basically what I realized in that was the people I enjoyed speaking to most of all was comedians. And so I'm continuing to do the DOC, but this year it's more of a political version of it. So I'm really having political conversations. And I'm like, but I love comedians. I'm a fanboy.
But I miss them.
Yeah. So I want to do something with comedians. And I guess I don't know if there's many out there, actually. I mean, there's lots of comedians talking to comedians about comedy, but I'm not a comedian. I don't know if there's very many kind of fanboys, huge fan of comedy, talking to comedians about comedians. So I think that's the lane I'm sort of sitting in.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, no. I can't think of any. All of the comedy podcasts are, comedians interviewing comedians that I can think of.
Yeah. And I'm not funny at all. I'm a fucking curmudgeon, bro. So curmudgeons interviewing comedians
so
about
are
comedy.
A lot of comedians,
Hey, well, thanks for coming on board. We're just going to get into this. So welcome to the show, Robbie Nicol, aka White Man Behind the Desk, aka Citizen's Handbook. It's cool. We've talked before on the other podcast, but I really am quite intrigued in your story and your comedy story. So I really want to talk to you about that. So why don't we just get into it? And it was about 7 years ago. I've been looking at your YouTube channel. Yeah. It was a time where, Jon Stewart and John Oliver and all these primarily American Caucasian comedians were sitting behind a desk, pontificating, some better, some worse. And you came out with the YouTube channel, of course, White Man Behind a Desk, and it fucking blew up. I mean, it would be fair to say it blew up. I mean, you were interviewed on RNZ back then talking about New Zealand's Jon Stewart and all sorts of things. Tell me about the journey getting to deciding to do that and tell me about when that happened, the story around it.
Yeah, okay. Can do. Well, thanks for having me on.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure. Always happy to have an excuse to talk about myself and comedy.
Yeah.
Two of my favorite subjects. Yeah, I as you say, I was a huge fan of Jon Stewart for forever. I think, yeah, I was in like year 10 and we had to write about someone we admired, and I wrote about Jon Stewart, and my
Nice.
social studies teacher was like, I don't know who this is, but okay. And so I've been a fan of his since way back, and and Stephen Colbert's White House Correspondents' Dinner speech is like one of the moments I was like, oh my God, I love this. And I think, obviously, to be fair, like, it was at a time when, George W. Bush was president, and there weren't
Yeah.
that many people speaking out against the Iraq War and stuff. So there was a real place for that kind of counterculture voice in America. And then it kind of, became increasingly mainstream, I guess. And then I think, I was making a web series with the Candle Wasters, who were making adaptations of Shakespeare plays into contemporary modern web series. That old
That old
chestnut.
chestnut. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I had a dollar for
Yeah.
every time I've heard someone making that, mate,
I know.
I'd
Everybody
do
was
rich.
doing it.
I'd do rich.
Now, this is the space we're going to be using. Now, it's not quite as big as we'd wanted it to be. You'll notice that I can physically touch the two walls at the same time, which is really not exactly what we were going for, but we reckon we can fit, if I stand here, we reckon we could get 20 in down this side, and then another 20 through here. So that's a full 40, and then, and then we'd use the windows. So we really want that. It's hard to explain, but we want the audience to feel as though they made the deal. Okay, we really want them to feel. We want them to feel as though they are Faustus.
Yeah, so that old thing. So we were doing that, and they were getting crazy views. If a white man behind a desk was doing well, I mean, yeah, the Candle Wasters were doing insanely well.
Wow.
Hundreds of thousands of views. People were really, really into their stuff, and so it did kind of just create an environment where I was involved in this project, and I was like, oh, okay, so you can just make stuff, and nobody stops you, and you're just allowed to upload it to the internet. And it is that thing, it's like when all the Nepo baby discourse, it's like you do just, often it's just because, Nepo babies see their parents do it, and so it seems plausible.
Yeah.
It's not even anything more complicated than that. And I think that's what it was for me with these friends, where I was like, oh, I'm just seeing you do it. And so all of a sudden this seems like a thing you can do. And so then, I asked Sally and Elsie Bollinger to help me do a Jon Stewart type thing. Was as complicated as it got. And and so we shot the first episode, and then Sally and Elsie's mum gave us the good advice to put it out there as if we think it's good. Like don't put it out as like a amongst your friends, what do you reckon? Should we do this as a proper thing? Like, put it out and just pretend that it's already an official show that people should be watching and sharing.
Right.
And that turned out to be quite good advice. And people shared it around. And I think, ultimately it was because, it was the John Key era. Everybody was really, he was a very popular prime minister. And so to have this kind of lefty come in and do some satirical takes that kind of went against the grain of a lot of what people were saying. And he was, it was just me in my early 20s with, in my bedroom having a rant. I think it had an authentic edge that people liked, but also like enough professionalism there that people shared it around. And so we got,
well, it was the script. Nice. It was the scripting, wasn't it? It was the content. I mean, I've long been a proponent of, it doesn't really matter. Once CNN started to allow people on Skype to come in and talk to them as interviews, they kind of set the level that actually it's the words that matter. I know we all love 4K, we all love it to look perfect and be produced,
Yeah.
but it's the quality that holds the people. It's the content, and your scripts were very, very good, which I guess feels a little bit different to the Jon Stewart scenario. Although obviously their stuff is scripted, he did feel a bit more off the cuff, and especially when he had interviews and guests. Now I know you've done interviews, but that was very
Yeah.
much more maybe more in the style of a today John Oliver, rather than a then Jon Stewart, just a piece to camera for a period of time, the facts, the scripting, and that's probably the reason it went, is because of the content rather than the bedroom set or whatever. Although that, that added that bit to it of Kiwiism, we're just doing this, boys, number 8 wire, 4x2, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, definitely, like, Charlie Brooker was another person that I was a big fan of at the time. Right. So putting things through his kind of his sardonic kind of tone of that kind of like a slight bitterness and kind of frustration with society was, definitely his Newswipe stuff, and was a big influence as well. And then I mean, John Oliver then became the touchstone, but he started, I can't remember when he started, but it must have been around the same time. And like, obviously we took a lot of inspiration from him, but to begin with, Jon Stewart was the reference, for sure.
Yeah. And when you, because you blew up, it'd be fair to say you blew up. I mean, like, I'm looking at your YouTube channel right now, and those clips from 7 years ago, there's like 20 to 30,000 views on lots of them. For New Zealand, that's pretty massive, and it blew up pretty quick. So obviously you talked about a touchstone. Obviously it hit the feeling that some people wanted to get. I mean, when that started happening, how did that feel for you? How did that change anything you guys were doing?
I think it definitely made us feel like, oh, this is a thing to keep doing. Right. That was the main thing that was, that the views meant was, oh, we're allowed to keep doing this. This makes sense to keep doing this. Otherwise we would have just gone, okay, well, nobody liked that, and that's totally fine, and we'll try something else. The fact that I've ended up doing the Citizens Handbook since, and I'm still, pitching series in this kind of political comedy area, it's definitely the result of the fact that people picked it up and ran with it and liked it. That's what that meant more than anything, I think. So that's it legitimized it enough for us to feel like we could keep doing it, I guess, is the only thing that it really made me think. Otherwise it's kind of just numbers, it's not like standing in front of an audience or anything. It doesn't feel tangible, really.
Oh, no, it doesn't feel tangible, but it is like standing in front of an audience. I mean, I sometimes look at content that people put out there, and you go, shit, that's Eden Park, or shit, that's 3 Eden Parks, or, so you can think about it that way.
Totally.
It's still eyes. I mean, it's no different really from a radio station with listeners on their books, or a television station with viewers on their books. So
it just feels different,
Yeah, totally. But mind you, being on the internet, you don't get that immediate response like you would on stage, but it's pretty quick. I mean, within minutes of something being out, you can get the response. So maybe not the live response, but still a pretty immediate response, at least to the finished product, an immediate response to the finished product.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's true. You definitely know the ones that have done well.
And look, I'd be really keen to hear your story about the longevity of that as well, because it appears that it hit really hard, really hot to start off with. Yeah. But then if you're looking at the biggest ones, there's still the ones that are around that 5, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, there's the Three Waters one, which has done really well, and there's other bits and bobs as well. Did you guys pull away from it? I know, did you guys pull away from it, or were you a bit of a Noah's Ark? I talk about the Noah's Ark story being, it served its purpose for a moment and then it was gone. Was it more that there was something in society that you went, okay, thank you for being our touch point for a while, but now there's not? Did you guys pull back? What happened after that kind of hysteria, my word? The hotness kind of mellowed a little bit. I mean, the content is still as good as it's ever been, but the views weren't quite the same. What happened around that?
Yeah, I think my goal was never to be a YouTuber. Like, that was never like my plan or a business model or anything, was to, I never wanted to be YouTube first. So I think it was very cool, to be putting out that content to begin with, and to have that traction was a really good, like, affirmation that
Right.
the content was good enough. And so that was really cool. And to begin with doing, I was just writing a new monologue every week, and then that was very quickly apparently not sustainable, to be doing that while, not making any money from it, obviously, just putting it out there on the internet for free. And so, getting a job to stay alive at the same time. And
Right.
then so it was sort of like I had my calling card of like, I made this thing and that thing is there, and if you would like to hire me to make a similar thing, I can do that. But
Right.
it, in the 20-30,000 view area, it's not enough money to to keep doing it. Like, it's good numbers for New Zealand, and that's great, and it hopefully is an indication of your ability to create good content.
Yeah.
But you're not getting much money from the ad revenue,
So that was, it sounds like it's kind of your Spirit of Christmas. The guys from South Park put out the Spirit of Christmas
totally.
on VHS. That went out, and all sorts of people started to pay attention to whoever these guys were that made this thing, and then that led them to other things. Is that the vibe you're talking about?
100%. Yeah,
Right.
that's a great analogy. Yeah, it was the VHS tape that was being, copied and handed around producers' offices, where they were going, "Oh yeah, this is this guy, and he's kind of doing this thing," and it takes a while. It turns out, as we've found, it's not the easiest. You can't just create one thing that is quite good and then you immediately get a TV show. It doesn't quite work that way. And I think, in order to keep practicing, and to keep my finger on the pulse, and to kind of stay in it, Phineas Tippett, who's my co-writer, and I have kept doing the Patreon.
Right.
And that was initially supposed to just be Patreon, and we were just going to do that, monologues once a month for patrons. And then, patrons were like, we would love it. Part of the reason we're kind of giving you money is because we like this content and we want people to see it. Like, we like that you're making educational stuff, and we appreciate it, but we'd also kind of love it if you shared it around, because we would like to share it with people so that they can learn about Three Waters or transphobia, or whatever the topic is that we've covered. And so we agreed to put some of the monologues out on YouTube, but sporadically, and not at a pace that would build the traction that you need to get a lot of views. And then the other thing as well is, and I've talked about this a bit, is the nature of New Zealand on-air funding, and the fact that in order to get access to it, maybe I would have become a YouTuber if the funding model was different.
Preaching to the choir, brother. You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah. Yeah. So if the funding model was different, then maybe YouTube could have been a primary home. But because of how the funding model is structured, which is, that you have to get funding for a specific project, and you have to get that project across the line with a platform that has a significant amount of reach, that means that you kind of have to leave your YouTube channel in order to access funding from the state.
Yeah.
And I'm not massively wealthy, so I did have to go for funding from the state in order to keep making things. And so in order to do that, we had to team up with RNZ and make a separate product, which was the Citizens Handbook, which meant we kind of had to say goodbye to our YouTube channel for a while. And so all of those things result in it not being a home base for us in the same way that it was when we started out.
Do you look back, because I can say I look back to 2008 when I was doing a political podcast with Jeremy Elwood, and part of me today goes, fuck, bro, if you had kept doing that, where you could or would be today? Is there any part of you that looks back about the decision you made then and goes, we should have pushed through, we should have done it? Or are you perfectly happy that that was your Spirit of Christmas and it's onwards and upwards?
I think there's definitely part of me that thinks, like, what if I had kept doing it at that frequency? But there's also just another part of me that knows that that was not feasible.
Right.
That I couldn't have done that. Maybe if if the funding had been available, but to bring in, like another person, if I found Phineas Teppert, my co-writer, a little bit sooner so that we could have alternated monologues. And, there's a lot of things you think, well, if that had just been this way and if that had been that way, but realistically they weren't. So you can't, you can't go, I should have rewritten history and the structures and systems in place at the time and the people I met at certain times. And then this would have happened. And you're like, that's a lot of ifs that you're cobbling together to create this reality. Definitely.
What about, I'm interested in the RNZ relationship as well, because you're doing Citizens Handbook.
Hi, I'm Robbie. Minister, if I could just...
No, not you.
Why? Oh, bye-bye. Lots of camera angles.
Potatoes.
The potatoes?
Yeah, the potatoes.
New Zealand. For better or worse, it's a country, and you're a citizen there, and you're supposed to know how it works. So, let's get into it.
Oh, shit! Yes, it's fine!
Ah! This is New Zealand.
And he's quite the doozy.
What?
No thanks, not keen.
Hi, Queenie.
I'm gonna eat you, and there's nothing you can do about it, so just shut up already!
That's not true. It's not true. It was a joke.
And you've still got ideas for White Man Behind the Desk. If you're receiving funding through doing something for RNZ, is there ever a conflict of interest or a concern of a conflict of interest that the stuff you're being funded for is being used here, but actually there's an idea that's going elsewhere, which is not? It's almost like the money that you're receiving to fund to do one thing is also kind of helping you do the other thing on the side. Is there ever a kind of conflict around that? Did RNZ ever kind of say, well, now you're doing this, you need to stop doing that? Was there ever an issue with doing two things at the same time?
No, I mean, not explicitly. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, there's no
edict from on high.
Yeah, there's no edict from on high of don't do this other thing so that you can do this thing. It's really just a matter of time and energy, and the fact that if you are doing one thing, you don't have the time to do the other thing. So while we're making the Citizens Handbook for RNZ, we're not making White Man Behind a Desk for our YouTube channel. And I think, like, definitely our tone, in the Citizens Handbook is a lot more inclusive and gentle and educational rather than critical and sarcastic and bitter and angry. And, and I think, we're definitely aware of the fact that, if you do a show where you're ranting your political beliefs for 10 minutes, not everybody's going to love your political beliefs or love your episode. And so, we're definitely aware of the fact that sometimes people might not be the biggest fans of us for that reason. And I think, often I was talking to my sibling about this the other day, because obviously we're all kind of like this. And we were saying that often when we meet people, they're like quite surprised by how just sort of relaxed and kind of friendly we are. And it's like, well, when I'm doing my angry monologue, I'm talking about something I'm angry about. That's why I chose that topic for comedy, because I thought it was absurd and I got worked up about it. But in my day-to-day life, I just kind of hang out. So I think there's no overt conflict of interest. But I do think we're aware of, one, how putting your political beliefs out there can influence how people think of you and whether they want to work with you, etc. And two, we're aware that being pulled away to do something for RNZ means we're not doing anything for our YouTube channel.
Little side note, I've been talking this week a little bit about the Gary Lineker situation with the BBC. You're involved with New Zealand's version of the BBC. Is there anything that you need to be careful of when you're doing White Man Behind the Desk, because you are doing news, comedy, but it's still news, and then RNZ is concerned or shown concern about how you're then portraying opinion based on politics publicly? Has that ever been a conversation, or is it something that's a concern or been voiced as something to watch out and avoid?
No, I mean, I'm very lucky that I've been categorized
Short
as
answer.
a comedian.
No.
Short answer,
Yeah.
no. I'm
Yeah.
like, we had, some complaints to the media council on our first season of Citizens Handbook, and it was quite satisfying to read the response, which was just, first sentence was, well, right away, this was funded as a comedy show, so none of these complaints are valid or
Right.
will be considered. Moving on, we also think that that it was valid to these opinions are not outside the realms of acceptable opinion, and etc. etc.
But that headline of comedy is good. I feel like the BBC situation, not that we're necessarily talking topical stuff in this podcast, but
Yeah,
the headline for Gary Lineker is he's a sports commentator. End of
Well, yeah,
conversation.
that was kind of my interpretation of the
Yeah.
situation. Was like, how does this interfere with his job at all? He talks about sports on Match of the Day. I don't really get this. But yeah, anyway, that's a bit of a shame. It's not nice to see the BBC lose popularity, I don't like it.
You talked before, you said that it wasn't your plan to be a YouTuber. What is or was your plan? Like, what was your plan in 2015-ish when this was blowing up? And what is your plan now?
Good question.
Thanks, you gave it to
What
me
is-
by saying it wasn't your plan. So this is actually your question. I'm just a mirror, Robbie. I'm just a mirror reflecting back on you, your own
It's
comments.
incredible. It's
Bless
incredible
you.
seeing an
Bless
endure
you.
at work. This is all these years of practice. It's impressive. Yeah, I think what was my plan in 2015? I think my plan in 2015 was be Jon Stewart.
All right.
And that was pretty cut and dry. And
sorry to interrupt you. Really terrible interviewing monologue details here. But
yeah,
but because of that, why didn't it ever
Yeah.
go to TV? Why didn't you end up ever being like a Thursday night show on TVNZ, or were those conversations had at the time?
Why didn't I? I think I don't know.
No?
I think
Were those conversations happening at the time? Because after it blew up, obviously that means the public like this. Once often, a media company sees what the public likes, they want to bring it on board. Was that ever a, even if not an opportunity, an idea that was floating around amongst more than just like you and your mates?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we put White Man Behind a Desk on TVNZ on demand. I think it didn't do that well over there from
Right.
memory. Like on their platform, it kind of didn't get the traction for whatever reason. And I wonder if that maybe affected things. I think also just to be fair, I didn't, and I still don't really, but I at the time really had no idea how the TV industry worked.
Right.
And so I knowing what I know now about how you put together a pitch and who you would talk to and how to get it over the line, and then I think it could have happened at the time. Maybe if I'd known a bit more about just how to structure that,
knowing how to play the game. That's what you're saying.
knowing how to play the game, and also just I guess knowing how to play the game.
Knowing how to play the game and hope you don't come up against a Harvey Weinstein. That's sort of the
sure. I mean,
the gist.
that's quite far on the terrible end.
It
But
is.
There's
It
a
is.
whole spectrum of terribleness before you get to Harvey Weinstein. But I think also, I don't know. Yeah, part of me is it's annoying that there wasn't some talent system in place to kind of guide people who maybe had the creative know-how but not the industry know-how to get to that point.
That seems to be something that the BBC does do brilliantly. I mean, a lot of people have been talking of the Gary Lineker situation, that when he started, he was one of the most atrocious commentators and pundits on television, and they actually trained him up and have turned him into the highest paid, football commentator and pundit out there. So there's it's an interesting thing that you talk about, because it's just been a conversation I've been having in the last week, that the public broadcaster internationally does seem to have that talent training pool. They see a Robbie Nicol and they go, oh, we could do something with that. He could be our Jon Stewart in 10 years from now. We should get him in. That doesn't exist in New Zealand. And probably if they had any vision, that could be a really interesting idea. All those comedians and gifted people and writers and actors out there could be brought on board as they were a bit raw and a bit sort of with harsh edges, and worked out how to give them a platform. Like we hear the stories about, how the BBC sent letters to people like John Cleese saying this will never work, and but they approved it anyway because they're like, well, we need comedy, and there you've got Monty Python. You know what I mean? That sort of thing seems to be missing in public broadcasting today.
Yeah, totally. And and definitely like I'm very grateful to have been part of, with Citizens Handbook and stuff, to have been part of the Kevin and Co kind of pool of comedic talent, who's done, New Zealand Today and Funny Girls and Jono and Ben, and, worked pretty hard to create any kind of ecosystem that allowed that talent to come through. But it kind of just feels like, it's that path is not as clear cut as it has been at other times.
What about your plan today? That was your plan. Your plan was to be Jon Stewart before I so rudely interrupted you. What's the plan today as an old wise man now, knowing all about the game?
Oh yeah. Now that I'm 29 and I know everything there is to know.
Dude, 30. 30 this year or 30 next year?
30 this year, October.
Oh, how do you feel about that?
Feel good about that? I don't know.
Is that for another podcast?
I don't know yet. Yeah, there's too much to unpack.
You can go on Petra's podcast where she talks to like menopausal woman. That'll be the place to talk about turning 30, perhaps.
Okay, great.
Right?
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I'll be like, I think I get this. Let me weigh in.
So plans from today. What's the big plan? Waving the magic wand. What's happening with Robbie Nicol? Yeah.
What's happening? We've got a few plans. One thing that we're doing is being a little bit tired of asking for permission to do things, going a little bit back to square one and doing what we used to do. I've spoken to my patrons about it, and they're all on board, which is very nice of them, to take some of that money and put that into like a monthly late night live show, which would be an opportunity, again, like as a way to demonstrate ability, but also to just practice in front of an audience and to get back into doing some interviews and broaden out the skills a little bit. So that's something that is happening in the short-ish term, which is fun. And meanwhile, Finn Tippett and I are just pitching our little hearts out all the time. I would say we come up with like, we're constantly meeting with different producers, and we have, hundreds of sitcoms and live action TV ideas that we're, constantly going, hey, well, could we do this maybe as a little panel show, or could we do this as a little sitcom? Could this be a thing? And then we get to various stages through the TV3 and TVNZ and Sky behemoths, and we just keep pushing. But definitely we're looking forward to being able to do that monthly live show as well, and just to kind of vent and practice and have something where nobody's allowed to say, no, you can't do that show. We just do it. And it's an election year, so that'll be fun. So just trying to find that balance, really, of doing things that, I was watching, I don't know if you know Podcast But Outside. Have you seen any of that? It's these two...
No, I don't think so.
It's these two LA comedians, and they just set up a table outside in LA. It's on YouTube, and it's also in podcast form, as the name would suggest. And they just interview whoever walks past, and they sit down and they just have a chat to them. And they also sometimes have comedian guests who are like arranged to turn up at this random street corner.
Who just happen to be walking past. Oh.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't realize.
Yeah, what a coincidence.
It's like the classic scene where on Jackass, David Grohl just happened to be walking past on Jackass the other side of the street, and they went and got his belt off him. It's like, oh, look, what a coincidence. Dave Grohl just happened to be walking past the Jackass set. Yeah.
Yeah, someone who I imagine is a Jackass fan. But yeah, no, most of the time it is just random people who just stop and talk to them. Anyway, I was watching this and I was just like, oh, I'm really jealous of these people. I am quite tired of pitching at this point. And, it's a pretty draining, it's an emotionally draining exercise, especially, the further you get through the process, the more draining it is to then get a no. I'm sure you have experienced that where you just like, you feel like you're so close and then you get a no and you're like, this hurts more. This is worse. So I was just watching them and I was like, oh,
I could mention some names literally right now
Yeah.
as we're speaking, but I won't.
Yeah. We absolutely could. We're going to be responsible people, look after
and
our
not
careers.
and not burn those bridges because people are busier than me.
Let's leave those doors open. But yeah, so kind of like, okay, that's enough pitching for a little while. Let's just make a show and put it on. And I think that is one nice thing about, I'm in Auckland, and it just feels like that's something you can just do. And that's the other thing as well, where it's like, I feel like we've got a big enough platform online and stuff that we can just promote that and people will come along. And
so live studio audience, that sort of thing.
Yeah, live studio audience, doing a bit of just a late night show, basically.
And live stream as well?
Unsure. Because I also
come talk to me.
Yeah, I'll talk to you. We'll talk to this afterwards. We'll do some technical chats.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah,
easy, bro.
That's not as fun for the audience.
Yeah, look, it sounds exciting, especially as you say, coming up to election year to see what actually
totally
you can swing together. I was also wondering who you think you are at your core when it comes to comedy. I've asked like all the comedians this, like what are you? Are you a stand-up? Are you a this? Are you that? Michelle Acortt said to me in her response, and so I'm going to rephrase the question, but I want to give credit to her. Like, when you're traveling internationally, what do you put down on the entry form as your occupation?
I write down writer presenter. That's normally what I say I am. I would say like the people I look at and I go, oh, I want to be that. Probably like a Martin Short type is someone who I love, like a little imp, like a cheeky imp. And he's not really a stand-up, but he does host things.
Right.
He's definitely a comedian.
Right.
But often he's in character more than he is himself. He's good at being a guest on shows, but he'll typically have a whole bit worked out, and he'll be like mean, but he'll be pretending to be nice while he's mean. And I feel like that kind of area, and he does comedic acting, but he's normally not that far away from himself when he does that. So I feel like that kind of area of performer and talent is like what I aspire towards, and that kind of tone. It doesn't neatly fit into a slot.
It sounds like you're describing like an Ant and Dec type character, like
sure,
either one of that sort of funny on stage, has comedy at the heart, presents, makes everyone like. I always think about like I do a little bit of work in marketing, but it sounds like you're saying the same thing. Whereas I take to people, I will take your product, which is fantastic, but I will wrap it and put a bow on it. I mean, that's what a good presenter does. A good presenter wraps the talent, puts a bow on them, makes them even better. But it's all about the core of the present that matters. And I'm happy just wrapping the gift for someone else. It's a bit like podcasting and interviewing. It's like we just want the best content to come out and provide the best platform for someone else to shine, even if the presenter or the host doesn't shine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And I think there are like a Conan OBrien or something, he's someone who came from totally a writing background and then was thrust on stage, and he says he was bad at it for a long time. But I think like there are people like that who aren't a neat, like it's not neatly in the category of improv or stand-up or comedy actor. It's kind of somewhere in the mashup of those things. And that's where I like to live, which is, I think sometimes it is hard where it's like, if I was just a stand-up, then I could just do stand-up, and then I could do panel shows, and then I could be on TV, and then I could sell tours.
Right.
Like the path seems clearer. Whereas when you're like I'm kind of a satirist who likes to do jokes that are kind of in character it's like you're kind of forging your own path a little bit more. But I'm sure a lot of stand-ups would say, yeah, I do stand up, but my actual thing is like slightly adjacent to that, or so we're all forging our own paths.
It's fascinating to think about the panel show thing, because here in New Zealand, since 7 days, that's sort of become more of a thing. And now have I been paying attention to you on TVNZ?
Have you been paying attention? Yeah.
That one, yeah. Not to you, but just in general. You've
Have
got
I been paying attention?
Have I been paying attention to you? Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I feel listened to.
Thank you. I'm just a mirror reflecting. Anyway,
Yeah.
you've got
Wow.
the chopper character seems to work quite well on there. Have you ever had any
Yeah,
approaches
totally.
or interest in being white man behind a desk but on a panel show? Has that ever conversation happened?
Yeah, I did one like trial show on at the classic, and obviously did not pass muster. They was not good enough to do that. They were like, this guy can't do this. So I did that one time. And you know, I've written for panel shows and stuff, and that's been fun. I love writing jokes. That's probably actually like me and Finn have written jokes together for shows, and that is one of the things that makes me happiest, because I do just like I love writing jokes. And I think there is a part of me that is just like didn't realize quite how much I love writing jokes. And that I guess you just spend your whole life listening to comedy podcasts and comedians and watching behind the scenes on YouTube and like kind of obsessing over every, you know, Oscars monologue or, you know, every time you get to see someone doing jokes, you get really excited. And then you kind of don't realize that that is a job and that you can like be paid for writing a unit of a joke. It seems like such a funny thing to be able to do.
And does that pan out that you love writing jokes for other people as much as for yourself as well? Like, does it not matter who delivers it? Wow.
That's been the discovery as well, because I think also it's fun to write like a proper joke. You know, like I think when we're writing like a white man behind a desk monologue, it's like because it's such a specific voice and a tone and an opinion, it's like a lot of the time the joke is the angle at which we're approaching an issue, or just like saying something that we think is truthful in a really blunt way that is not how you're supposed to say it or is revealing in some way. But it's also just really fun to be like, okay, set up punchline. What makes this funny is that this word has two meanings. And, you know, just like that feeling of like, oh, and I think that's also what's fun about it and joyful about it, is that you feel like, oh, this is in the tradition of like hundreds of years of like vaudeville, and, you know, like there's a grand tradition of set up punchline that has existed for so long, and there's something really nice and simple and straightforward about that, which I do love. Yeah.
On your journey of immense time spanning of 29 years, when did you actually realize you were funny? Like, when did you kind of go, I can make people laugh? When did that happen in your life?
I knew I was entertaining
right
quite young. Like, I knew that I could put on a show. Like, I definitely remember being like a kid at like parties and things and being like the one on the dance floor, keeping everyone excited and entertained and feeling like this is a fun place to be because there's this kid here who's... And then I think like I was definitely like, I was quite a nerdy guy, as you could probably imagine. So like I wasn't like a troublemaker, but I think that's also because I had like really supportive and attentive teachers. And if I didn't have that, then I probably would have been a troublemaker, because I wouldn't have felt like a way to release that energy. Like definitely like we had a sketch group in year 6. So that's when I was 10 years old. There was like a sketch group that went year to year, and we would put on a comedy sketch show every Friday, and
nice.
I loved doing that.
That's the last year of primary school for us old people. Year 6, last year of primary school.
Just before
you were
intermediate,
you were doing sketch comedy every week. It's hilarious.
Yeah, we were doing sketch comedy, and I used to be the one who was like, "We're not practicing enough. We need to write more sketches." And everybody else was like, "I don't know, man. We're kids." And I was like, "No."
I can write a better joke. I can write a better joke if you can.
And we were doing like parodies of game shows and stuff, and it was really, really. And I remember loving that, and definitely being like, and my teacher would leave sometimes. Like if she had to go do something, she'd be like, "Robbie's going to tell a story," and so then I would just sit in front of the class and tell a story. And the fact that like the other kids in the class were okay with that, you know, and weren't just like, why the hell would we let this kid in our class just sit in front of us and tell us a story for 5 minutes? So yeah, I definitely felt like I was entertaining. And then I think, I don't know, in terms of being funny, I'm not so sure, because I think also like all my friends were really funny and my
Yeah.
family was really funny. So you just kind of, I think if you're funny, you gravitate to other funny people, and then you
Right.
kind of just think everyone's funny. And then it's kind of only when you like go to a job or go to university or whatever, and you're actively pushed to hang out with people that aren't that funny, they're like, oh, I guess I'm kind of funny by comparison.
The thing about, I hear comedians often talking about like, oh, my sister, far funnier than me. My best mate,
Yeah,
funniest
yeah,
person I know. But there's a skill within the comedian, entertainer, writer, comedy world
yeah,
to be able to translate that funny into
yeah,
performance. And that seems to be the difference. Like I've always had this question about comedians. You know, you hear comedians telling amazing stories about their lives. And I kind of go,
yeah.
yeah, but if I had that story, I could be on stage telling that as well. And it's not, and I realized it's not true. It's like, I used to think
Yeah,
you're only a comedian because you've got these great stories to tell. It's like, no, they've identified and found the great stories and turned them
yeah.
into a performance. We've all had great stories, but these guys and girls have figured out how to turn them into an entertaining performance on stage for other people to enjoy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And I think, I saw a comment which I thought was totally true about Jimmy Kimmel hosting the Oscars the other night. And it
Yep.
was like, the most, like, these jokes are good, but the most amazing thing is that it really feels like he's just wandered out onto stage and has started talking. Like, it does not in any way feel like he is doing what he's doing, which is being in one of the most heightened, surreal, stressful environments you could possibly be in, and still feeling like you're casually talking to a friend. And so I think that's, to translate that, most of it is actually just, can you be as casual as you are with your friends hanging out in a totally surreal and strange environment where you should be stressed out if you're a normal person.
You talk about comedy and looking at jokes and liking to hear jokes and write jokes. What about comedians or performers for you? Because it might be a bit different from a stand-up comedian. Like as you were growing up, through your early 20s, as a kid and stuff, were there people or events you look to say they're amazing, I want to be like them? And what about now? Who do you look to? Who inspires you now?
Yeah. I think there's no surprises. I think growing up, it's the same as most people. Like, yeah, I remember seeing Holy Grail for the first time at a sleepover and being like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I didn't know you could be this funny. Like, I didn't know it was possible. Like, it felt like a layer had been broken where a new level of comedy was revealed. And I think, and like everyone, like, half my comedy style is just from The Simpsons, and
Yeah.
like it just goes in your brain and then it stays there, and you're like, yeah, that's how you make a joke, is how the Simpsons writers made a joke. I think now what's exciting is, because more people are allowed to do comedy, I think what I'm influenced by and what I see has kind of broadened out a little bit as well. And I think the form, and also just because it's the internet and people are making, in a kind of post Tim and Eric kind of era, you have people just making kind of whatever. And you're like, what is that? Is that sketch, or is that and you're like, I don't know, it's just funny. And so it's funny.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
true.
don't ask questions about it. Like I just watched Rajat Suresh and Jeremy Levick. I don't know if you saw this. They did something called The Hollywood Recorder, which was an hour-long parody of the like actors roundtable, where they have, where actors sit around and talk about themselves for an hour to try and get an Oscar. And they did a parody of that for like a full hour, and it looks exactly like the real thing. And it's just them speaking really seriously about, making really, really stupid jokes. And, I love the work that, Rajat and Jeremy do, which is just so funny and so deadpan and so serious. And that feels like, oh, you couldn't, I don't know, that's a style of comedy that people weren't making as much because it wasn't as easy to do a pitch perfect visual parody of something,
Mm.
as it is now. So that, I love that. Chris Fleming I find really, really funny. I'm really excited for Rachel Sennett and Iowa Debris' new movie, which I can't remember what that's called, but that looks like it's going to be really funny. Kind of a Fight Club meets Heathers is how it's been described. So I love that as a tagline. I feel like there's a lot more, diversity in comedians and diversity in style, which is really exciting. And that's also like fun as well. When I'm talking about, I want to do I'll do a late night show. And that's fun to be able to go, that's a great framework. And, that stood the test of time. And that's been around for 70 years or whatever, that exact kind of format of monologue, interview, musical guest or whatever. But I feel like because of all these different influences and because there's just this flourish of different styles of comedy happening all over the internet and people creating their own things that are all so different and subtle and weird and strange and totally free, you feel like, oh, okay, I'm going to take that framework and I don't know what it's going to be like. And we'll just do it once a month, and each month might be totally different, and we'll just try a totally different thing. And you're just kind of free to do that, which is really exciting. And I'm sure when Python started Monty Python's Flying Circus, it probably felt that way too, where it was like, this isn't how it's supposed to be, but we're just going to do it,
It's also interesting to hear what you're not necessarily, so you're not talking about a lot of necessarily stand-ups. You're talking about performers and actors and comedies and movies and presenters. When I asked Radar this kind of question, he referenced this television show from the 1990s called Beyond 2000, which was a TV show showing what the world going to be like beyond 2000. He's like, I want to be like them. That was his world. Yeah. And it sounds like echoing sort of your writer presenter.
Is that?
I can't remember. It's from the UK.
Yeah. Yeah,
and it showed like, look at this. This is a telephone with no wires. It was that kind of shit. Beyond 2000. But it sounds like you're not identifying as a stand-up comic. You're saying writer, presenter. And the people you look to and are inspired by, there are stand-ups in there, but are in that world of writer, presenter, actor as well.
Totally. And Chris Fleming, I mentioned, like they're a stand-up, but they kind of only do their own stand-up show, which is one kind of thing. And is it stand-up? I guess it's just a person with a microphone in front of an audience, so that's stand-up. But it would feel weird probably in like a normal club as a 5-minute set in between two other comedians. Do you know what I mean? You would be like, this is too much whiplash between what I just saw and this now. And I feel like because of the internet, there's more of a place for that because you can find your own little niche audience and you don't have to fit into the model of what other people are doing. And that is one good thing about the internet.
Hey, Robbie, it's been really nice to catch up with you today. I feel like we could talk for another hour, but we've got lives.
I'll just keep going. Sort of it's the one thing I can talk about forever. Yeah.
If people want to know more about what you're up to this year and find out more about you and where you are, how can they do that?
I'm always tweeting to a fault. So you can find me on Twitter at Robbie Nicol, ROBBIENICOL. You can support us on Patreon if you're really nice, patreon.com/whitemanbehindAdesk. That's very kind, and you'll be helping us create this live show and be getting access to all of that stuff before anyone else, which is, nice to feel a little special. And youtube.com/whitemanbehindAdesk. We upload stuff there too. So check us out.
When do you expect the live show to be happening, and will you be touring it? In theory.
Great question. Well, I am meeting with the producer next week, so I will have more answers to these questions as they happen.
So follow you on Twitter to find out more. I hope we see you in the South Island if you're going to do that. Come down and do a gig at some of the pubs or clubs down here, and we'll get to take your live show. Come and do some of the live political news out of the Dunedin world.
How's that going?
All right, Robbie. Well, it's going to be going interesting because Clark's off. He's retired, and so there's Dunedin North is available for people. Well, we shall see what happens. Hey, Robbie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, it's a big year. Thank you for giving us some time, and
my pleasure.
Wish you all the best, and say thanks for being on Let's Talk Funny.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.